Cowboy's lost honor. Clementine Clem Hollister had sworn off men after her last heartbreak, but when Darius Tate, a notorious stagecoach robber, held up her stage, she found herself strangely drawn to the outlaw's defiance. He leaned in close as he relieved her of her valuables, his dark eyes intense. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he murmured. "This ain't personal, but I'll be looking for you later." Chapter 1. The dust settles on broken vows. The desert wind, a relentless sculptor of both landscape and soul, whipped at Clementine Clem Hollister's skirts as she stood beside the crippled stagecoach. Dust devils danced across the vast expanse, mimicking the turmoil within her. The midday sun, a merciless eye in the cloudless sky, beat down on the stranded passengers and the scattered remnants of their belongings. It had been 6 hours since the robbery, 6 hours since him. Clem ran a calloused hand through her wind-tossed auburn hair, the strands, streaked with premature silver, catching the harsh light. She was 48, but the lines etched around her eyes, a roadmap of laughter lines turned sorrowful, made her feel a decade older. 5 years. 5 years since she'd buried Thomas, her husband, and with him, her faith in anything resembling lasting happiness. 5 years since she'd sworn off men, their promises as fleeting as desert rain. She glanced at the other passengers. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump, perpetually flustered woman, was still dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, lamenting the loss of her grandmother's cameo. Young Mr. Henderson, a traveling salesman with a slicked-back pompadour and a nervous twitch, was pacing back and forth, muttering about missed appointments and ruined prospects. Even the stoic driver, a grizzled man named Jeb, seemed shaken, his usual gruff demeanor replaced with a quiet unease. But Clem couldn't muster the same outward display of distress. Oh, the stolen strongbox, containing the meager savings she'd scraped together from her dressmaking business in Redemption Creek, was a blow. A significant one. It represented months of painstaking work, of needles pricking tired fingers, of late nights spent hunched over her sewing machine by the flickering lamplight. But it was the memory of his eyes, dark and intense, that truly unsettled her. Darius Tate. The name was whispered in hushed tones throughout the territory. A notorious stagecoach robber, a phantom who appeared and vanished like the desert mirages. Some said he was a ruthless killer, a devil incarnate. Others claimed he was a Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. Clem didn't know which to believe, but she knew this. He had looked at her, really looked at her in a way no man had since Thomas. It wasn't a look of lust, not exactly. It was recognition. As if he saw something beneath the carefully constructed facade of the widow Hollister, the respectable seamstress, the woman who had buried her heart alongside her husband. He had leaned in close as he relieved her of her small reticule, his breath warm against her ear. The scent of leather, gunpowder, and something wilder, something untamed, had filled her nostrils. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he had murmured, his voice a low, resonant drawl that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "This ain't personal, but I'll be looking for you later." The words, a blatant threat wrapped in a strange sort of courtesy, had echoed in her mind ever since. Looking for you later. Why? What did he want? Her money was gone. Her few trinkets, a silver locket containing a faded photograph of Thomas, a pair of simple pearl earrings, they were insignificant compared to the strongbox. She looked out at the vast, unforgiving landscape. Rolling hills, dotted with scrub brush and towering saguaros, stretched as far as the eye could see. The air shimmered with heat, blurring the line between earth and sky. It was a beautiful, brutal world, one that demanded resilience, one that offered no solace for broken hearts. Clem had come to Redemption Creek seeking refuge, a place to outrun the ghosts of her past. She had found a measure of peace in the quiet routine of her life, in the rhythmic whir of her sewing machine, in the friendly nods of her neighbors. But the robbery, Darius Tate's unsettling gaze, had stirred something within her, a dormant ember of something. Of fear? Excitement? She couldn't name it. Jeb finally managed to repair the broken wheel, his movements slow and deliberate. He straightened up, wiping his brow with a bandana. "We should be able to make it to Willow Creek by nightfall," he announced, his voice raspy. "Ain't much there, but it's shelter." Willow Creek. Another dusty speck on the map. Another town where she would be a stranger, a widow with a secret, a woman haunted by the memory of an outlaw's eyes. As they climbed back into the battered stagecoach, Clem felt a strange sense of foreboding. The robbery was over, the immediate danger past. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her encounter with Darius Tate was far from finished. It was only the beginning. The dust had settled, revealing not an ending, but a path, uncertain and perilous, stretching out before her into the unknown. Chapter 2. Shadows on the Horizon Line. Willow Creek was, as Jeb had predicted, not much. A handful of weathered buildings huddled together against the vastness of the desert, like children clinging to their mothers' skirts. A dusty main street, a saloon with swinging doors that creaked in the wind, a general store with a faded sign, and a small, ramshackle hotel that looked as if it had seen better days a long time ago. That was the extent of Willow Creek's offerings. The sun was a molten ball of fire sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and blood red as the stagecoach rumbled to a halt in front of the hotel. The air, still heavy with the day's heat, carried the scent of dust, sagebrush, and something faintly metallic, like the lingering ghost of a gunfight. Clem, stiff and weary from the long journey, climbed down from the stagecoach, her muscles protesting with every movement. Mrs. Abernathy, still sniffling, was helped down by Mr. Henderson, who seemed to have recovered some of his salesman's bravado, though his smile still seemed a little shaky. The hotel owner, a wiry man with a squint and a handlebar mustache that drooped like a weary willow branch, greeted them with a laconic nod. "Got 3 rooms left," he grunted, his voice like sandpaper. "Take M or leave M." Clem, sharing a room with Mrs. Abernathy, found little comfort in the cramped, sparsely furnished space. A narrow bed with a lumpy mattress, a chipped wash basin, and a single window overlooking the dusty street, it was hardly luxurious. But it was shelter, a temporary refuge from the vastness of the desert and the unsettling thoughts that chased her. After a meager supper of beans and stale bread in the hotel's dimly lit dining room, Clem excused herself and stepped outside. The air had cooled considerably, and a sliver of moon hung in the inky sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the town. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional howl of a coyote in the distance and the mournful creak of the saloon doors. She walked to the edge of town, her boots crunching on the dry earth. The desert stretched out before her, a vast, mysterious expanse under the starlit sky. It was a landscape that both intimidated and intrigued her. It was a place where secrets could be buried, where pasts could be erased, where a woman could disappear. But Clem didn't want to disappear. Not anymore. Thomas's death had initially felt that way, an implosion of her previous existence, a temptation to just fade into the dry landscape. For a long time, she had allowed grief to consume her, to define her. But Darius Tate's eyes, his unsettling words, had sparked something within her, a flicker of defiance, a refusal to be a victim. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had settled in her bones. It wasn't just the desert air. It was a deeper coldness, a fear that had taken root in her heart. She was afraid of Darius Tate, of what he represented, of the chaos he had unleashed in her carefully ordered life. But she was also afraid of something else, something more profound, the possibility that she might be drawn to that chaos, to the wildness that he embodied. A sudden sound, the soft thud of a horse's hooves, made her turn. A lone rider was approaching Willow Creek, a silhouette against the moonlit horizon. Clem's heart quickened. She couldn't see his face, but there was something about the way he sat his horse, a certain confidence, a certain familiarity, that sent a shiver of apprehension down her spine. As he drew closer, the moonlight illuminated his features. It wasn't Darius Tate. Relief washed over her, followed by a strange, inexplicable disappointment. This rider was younger, leaner, with a shock of blonde hair that fell across his forehead. He wore a dusty Stetson, a worn leather vest, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. He looked like trouble, but a different kind of trouble. He reined in his horse a few feet from her, his eyes, the color of the twilight sky, scanning her face. "Evenin'," he said, his voice a soft drawl, less resonant than Tate's, but still holding a hint of danger. "You lost, ma'am?" Clem straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze. "No," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not lost. I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. Waiting for what? For Darius Tate to reappear? For her life to return to normal? For the fear to subside? For the dawn, she finally said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. The writer studied her for a moment longer, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Dawn's a long way off, ma'am," he said. "Might be a cold wait." He dismounted, his movements fluid and graceful, and tethered his horse to a nearby post. "Name's Clay," he added, extending a hand. "Clay Harden." Clem hesitated again, then took his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "Clementine Hollister," she replied. He nodded, his eyes still holding hers. "Clementine," he repeated, the name sounding like a question on his lips. "You staying at the hotel?" She nodded. "Mind if I walk you back?" he asked. "Wouldn't want a lady like you wandering around alone in the dark." His words were polite, but there was an underlying current, a hint of something more than just chivalry. Clem knew she should refuse, should retreat to the safety of her room. But something, a reckless impulse, a desire to break free from the confines of her fear, made her nod again. As they walked back towards the hotel, the silence between them was thick with unspoken questions. Clay Harden was a mystery, a shadow on the horizon line, just like Darius Tate. And Clem found herself caught between them, between the known danger and the unknown, between the past she couldn't escape and the future she couldn't predict. The wait for dawn, she realized, was going to be much longer and much colder than she had anticipated. Chapter 3. A bandit's unexpected courtesy. The inside of the hotel was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single oil lamp hanging above the front desk. The air was thick with the smell of stale tobacco and something vaguely floral, perhaps a lingering trace of Mrs. Abernathy's perfume. Clay Harden held the door open for Clem, his hand brushing lightly against her back, sending a small, unexpected jolt through her. "Thank you," Clem murmured, avoiding his gaze. He nodded, his eyes still holding that unsettling intensity. "Just being neighborly," he replied, his voice soft. They stood for a moment in the awkward silence of the lobby. The desk clerk, the wiry man with the drooping mustache, was nowhere to be seen. Clem shifted uncomfortably, feeling Clay's presence like a weight, a palpable force in the small space. "Well," she said, turning towards the stairs, "I should get to my room." "Sleep well, Clementine," he said, his voice following her up the stairs. She didn't reply, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She reached her room, fumbled with the key, and slipped inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Mrs. Abernathy was already asleep, her snores a gentle, rhythmic rumble that filled the small room. Clem undressed quickly, slipping into her nightgown, the thin cotton feeling cool against her skin. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the moonlit street. Clay Harden's image, his twilight-colored eyes, his slow smile, lingered in her mind. He was a distraction, she told herself, a temporary diversion from the larger, more pressing problem of Darius Tate. But even as she tried to dismiss him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to her current predicament, a piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet figured out. She lay down on the bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Sleep, however, refused to come. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the day, the robbery, Tate's words, Clay's arrival. "Lookin' for you later." Tate's promise, or threat, echoed in her mind. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door startled her. She sat up, her heart pounding. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "It's me, Clementine," a familiar voice replied. A voice that sent a shiver of both fear and something else, something she couldn't quite name, down her spine. Darius Tate. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What did he want? Had he come to finish what he'd started? To take something more than just her money? She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had faced down grief, loss, and the harsh realities of the frontier. She wouldn't cower in fear. She opened the door. He stood there, silhouetted in the dimly lit hallway, looking even more imposing than she remembered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged, handsome face framed by dark, unruly hair. He wore a long, dusty coat, and a gun belt was strapped around his waist. But it was his eyes, those dark, intense eyes, that held her captive. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice a low, rumbling drawl. It wasn't a question, not really. It was a statement, an assertion of his power, his control. Clem stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He closed the door behind him, the click of the latch sounding loud in the quiet room. Mrs. Abernathy stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. "What do you want?" Clem asked, her voice surprisingly steady. She refused to show him her fear. He didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, taking in her nightgown-clad form, her bare feet, her tousled hair. It wasn't a lecherous look, not exactly. It was assessing. "I told you I'd be looking for you," he finally said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "You found me," Clem replied, her chin lifting slightly. "Now what?" He took a step closer, and she instinctively recoiled. He stopped, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "I came to return something," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. Clem's eyes widened in disbelief. He pulled out her reticule, the small, embroidered bag that had contained her few valuables. I don't understand," she stammered. He held it out to her. "Take it," he said. She hesitated, then reached out and took the bag. It felt heavier than she remembered. She opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside, nestled among her handkerchief and a small comb, was her silver locket, her pearl earrings, and a small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she recognized the handwriting. It was Thomas's. A letter, one she had written to him years ago, a love letter filled with youthful passion and promises of forever. A letter she had thought lost, buried with him. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She looked up at Darius Tate, her voice choked with emotion. How did you?" He shrugged, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Found it tucked away in your strongbox," he said. "Figured it might mean something to you." He had taken her money, her savings, everything she had worked for. But he had returned something far more precious, something irreplaceable. A piece of her past, a reminder of the love she had thought lost forever. It was an act of unexpected courtesy, a gesture that defied his outlaw reputation, a glimmer of something human beneath the hardened exterior. And in that moment, Clem saw not a bandit, not a threat, but a man, flawed and complex, capable of both cruelty and kindness. The fear remained, but it was now mingled with a profound sense of confusion, of uncertainty, of a grudging, unexpected respect. He had stolen from her, yes, but he had also given her something back. And she had no idea what to make of it. Chapter 4. The Whispers of Redemption Creek. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty window of Clem's room, chasing away the shadows of the night and, with them, some of the lingering fear. Mrs. Abernathy, thankfully, had slept through the entire encounter with Darius Tate, her snores a constant, oblivious counterpoint to the turmoil in Clem's heart. Clem rose, dressed quickly, and carefully tucked the recovered letter and her reticule into the small carpet bag she had managed to salvage after the robbery. The encounter with Tate still baffled her. His actions were contradictory, a strange mix of outlaw ruthlessness and unexpected gentleness. Returning her personal belongings, especially Thomas's letter, felt personal. It was a gesture that didn't fit the mold of a hardened criminal. Downstairs, the hotel dining room was buzzing with activity. Mr. Henderson, seemingly recovered from his ordeal, was holding court, regaling a small group of travelers with a highly embellished account of the stagecoach robbery. He caught sight of Clem and waved her over, a wide, salesman's smile plastered on his face. "Mrs. Hollister," he exclaimed, "come join us. I was just telling these fine folks about our harrowing experience." Clem forced a smile and joined the group, enduring Mr. Henderson's theatrical retelling of the events. He painted himself as a hero, of course, bravely facing down the desperados while protecting the damsels in distress. Clem bit her tongue, resisting the urge to correct his exaggerations. Clay Harden was also present, leaning against a wall, listening to Henderson's story, with a bemused expression on his face. He caught Clem's eye and gave her a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of their encounter the previous night. After breakfast, Jeb announced that the stagecoach was repaired and ready to continue its journey to Redemption Creek. Clem, relieved to be leaving Willow Creek and its unsettling inhabitants, quickly gathered her belongings and boarded the stage. The journey was uneventful, the landscape unfolding in a monotonous blur of sand, rock, and scrub brush. Clem spent most of the time lost in thought, replaying the events of the past 2 days. Darius Tate's face, his voice, his unexpected act of kindness, kept surfacing in her mind. Finally, late in the afternoon, the stagecoach rumbled into Redemption Creek. Clem's town. Her refuge. Or so she had thought. Redemption Creek was larger than Willow Creek, a bustling frontier town with a thriving main street, a bustling saloon, a well-stocked general store, a church with a gleaming white steeple, and a scattering of houses and businesses stretching out towards the surrounding hills. It was a town built on hope, on the promise of a new beginning, a place where people came to escape their pasts and build a better future. Clem's small dressmaking shop, located on a quiet side street, was a welcome sight. The sign above the door, Clementine's Creations, was slightly faded, but still legible. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed a sigh of relief. The familiar scent of fabric, thread, and beeswax greeted her, a comforting reminder of her life before the robbery, before Darius Tate. But even here, in her sanctuary, she couldn't escape the feeling that things had changed, that her carefully constructed world had been irrevocably altered. The news of the stagecoach robbery had already reached Redemption Creek, spread by the ever-efficient frontier grapevine. As Clem walked down Main Street, she was met with a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and something else. Whispers followed her, glances were exchanged, and she felt the weight of the town's collective gaze. She stopped at the general store to replenish her supplies, her conversation with the store owner, a kindly, gossipy woman named Martha, punctuated by pointed questions about the robbery and the infamous Darius Tate. "Heard he was a handsome devil," Martha said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Is that true, Clem?" Clem, flustered, mumbled a noncommittal reply, paid for her purchases, and quickly escaped. Back at her shop, she busied herself with unpacking, cleaning, and trying to restore a sense of normalcy to her life. But the whispers of Redemption Creek, the curious glances, the unspoken questions, followed her even here. She was no longer just Clementine Hollister, the widow, the seamstress. She was now the woman who had been robbed by Darius Tate, the woman he had singled out, the woman he had spared. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across her shop, Clem sat at her sewing machine, her fingers mechanically guiding a piece of fabric under the needle. But her mind was elsewhere, miles away, back in Willow Creek, back in that dimly lit hotel room, face to face with the man who had turned her world upside down. The rhythmic whir of the machine, usually a soothing sound, now seemed to mock her, a reminder of the peace she had lost, the uncertainty that lay ahead. The whispers of Redemption Creek were not just gossip, they were a constant reminder that her life was no longer entirely her own. It was, in some strange, inexplicable way, now intertwined with that of an outlaw. Chapter 5. Scars Beneath the Surface. The days following Clem's return to Redemption Creek settled into a routine, but it was a routine tinged with a new kind of unease. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra orders, spending long hours at her sewing machine. The rhythmic clatter of the machine and the feel of fabric beneath her fingers were a balm, a temporary escape from the swirling questions and anxieties that plagued her. But the whispers persisted. Every customer, every neighbor, every casual encounter on the street seemed to carry an undercurrent of curiosity about Darius Tate. Some were sympathetic, offering words of comfort and support. Others were more blatant, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fascination. One afternoon, Sheriff Brody, a stout, middle-aged man with a walrus mustache and a perpetually weary expression, stopped by her shop. He was a good man, honest and fair, but he also represented the law, the very force that Darius Tate defied. "Afternoon, Clem," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing after, well, you know." Clem forced a smile. "I'm fine, Sheriff," she replied. "Just trying to get back to normal." He nodded, his eyes studying her face. "Heard Tate returned your things," he said, his voice low. "That's unusual." Clem felt her cheeks flush. "Yes," she said. "He did." The sheriff leaned against the counter, his gaze thoughtful. "Tate's a puzzle," he said. "He's robbed dozens of stages, banks, even a train or two. But he's never killed anyone. And he's got a reputation, some say, for certain acts of kindness. Helping folks in need, that sort of thing." Clem didn't know what to say. The sheriff's words only deepened the mystery surrounding Darius Tate. "Just be careful, Clem," the sheriff said, his voice serious. "Tate's a dangerous man, no matter what stories folks tell. And he seems to have taken an interest in you." He tipped his hat and left, leaving Clem alone with her thoughts. That evening, as Clem was closing up shop, she heard a familiar voice. "Evenin', Clementine." She turned, her heart skipping a beat. Clay Harden was standing in the doorway, his blonde hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. He wore the same dusty clothes as before, the same gun belt slung low on his hips. "Mr. Harden," she said, her voice a little breathless. "What brings you to Redemption Creek?" He smiled, a slow, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just passing through," he said. "Thought I'd check up on you, see how you were faring." His words echoed the sheriff's, but there was something different in his tone, a hint of something possessive. "I'm fine," Clem replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He stepped inside the shop, his presence filling the small space. He looked around, his eyes taking in the bolts of fabric, the patterns, the sewing machine. "Nice place you got here," he said. "You're a talented woman, Clementine." "Thank you," she said, feeling a strange mix of flattery and unease. He moved closer, his eyes holding hers. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about you, Clementine. About what happened on that stagecoach." Clem felt a shiver run down her spine. "It was a robbery, Mr. Harden," she said. "Nothing more." He chuckled softly. "Maybe," he said. "But I think there's more to it than that. I think Tate sees something in you. Something special." "I don't know what you're talking about," Clem said, her voice trembling slightly. He reached out and touched a strand of her hair, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Don't you?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Clem pulled away, her heart pounding. "Mr. Harden," she said, her voice firm, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." He smiled again, that same unsettling smile. "I'm sure you are, Clementine," he said. "But everyone needs a little help sometimes. And I'm here to offer mine." His words, meant to be reassuring, sounded like a threat. Clem felt trapped, caught between the known danger of Darius Tate and the unknown intentions of Clay Harden. Both men, in their own way, represented a threat to her carefully constructed world, to the fragile peace she had found in Redemption Creek. As Clay finally left, promising to see her around, Clem locked the door, her hands shaking. She leaned against the door, her eyes closed, trying to calm her racing heart. She felt like a small boat caught in a storm, tossed between two powerful waves. and she had no idea which one would break her first. The scars of her past, the loss of Thomas, the carefully buried emotions, were now being exposed, raked raw by the attention of two men who represented everything she had tried to escape. She was no longer just surviving, she was being hunted, not for her possessions, but for something far more intangible, something buried deep within her soul. Chapter 6. Echoes of a Forgotten Promise. The following week brought a flurry of activity to Redemption Creek. Preparations were underway for the annual Founders' Day celebration, a 3-day festival of music, dancing, food, and games. The town square was decorated with bunting and flags, and the air was filled with the sounds of hammering, sawing, and excited chatter. Clem, despite her inner turmoil, found herself drawn into the preparations. She volunteered to help with the decorations, using her sewing skills to create colorful banners and tablecloths. It was a welcome distraction, a chance to lose herself in the collective energy of the town, to temporarily forget about Darius Tate and Clay Harden. But even amidst the festivities, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being caught in a web of unspoken secrets. She saw Clay Harden several times, always at a distance, his eyes following her, his presence a constant reminder of the unease she felt. She hadn't seen Darius Tate since that night in Willow Creek, but his image, his words, his unexpected act of kindness continued to haunt her dreams. One evening, as Clem was walking home from a late-night sewing session at the town hall, she saw a figure standing in the shadows near her shop. Her heart quickened. She recognized the silhouette, the broad shoulders, the long coat. Darius Tate. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to turn and run. But something, a mixture of curiosity and a strange sense of inevitability, drew her forward. He stepped out of the shadows, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He looked different, less imposing somehow, less like an outlaw, more like a man. "Clementine," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Mr. Tate," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, his gaze shifting away from hers.
"Just checking on you," he said.
"Making sure you're all right." His words echoed Clay Harden's, but they sounded different coming from him. More genuine somehow. Less threatening. "I'm fine," Clem said.
"As you can see."
He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Are you?" he asked, his voice low. "Really?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was she wasn't fine. She was confused, frightened, and drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. He took a step closer and she didn't retreat. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a gentle touch, a tender touch, a touch that sent a shiver of warmth through her. "I didn't want to scare you," he said, his voice a whisper. "Back in Willow Creek. Or on the stage." "You did," Clem admitted, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of regret and something else. Something she couldn't quite decipher. "I had to," he said. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Clem asked, her brow furrowing. "What's complicated about robbing a stagecoach?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "There are things you don't know, Clementine," he said. "Things about me, about my past, about why I do what I do." He paused, then turned back to her, his eyes locking with hers. "There's a reason I returned your things," he said. "A reason I came back." Clem's heart pounded in her chest. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into the unknown. "What reason?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Years ago," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I made a promise. A promise to a dying man. A promise to protect someone." Clem's eyes widened. She remembered the letter, Thomas's letter, the one Tate had returned to her. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling.
"Who did you promise to protect?"
He looked at her, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion she had never seen before. "You, Clementine," he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper that seemed to hang in the night air. "I promised Thomas I'd look after you. The forgotten promise. a whispered vow in the face of death, echoed across the years, bridging the gap between outlaw and widow, between danger and desire. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the familiar landscape of Redemption Creek shifting, rearranging itself around this single, shattering revelation. Chapter 7. The Price of Freedom's Flame. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the silence before a desert storm. Clem stared at Darius, her mind reeling, struggling to make sense of his words. Thomas? Her Thomas? He had known Darius Tate? He had asked him to protect her? I don't understand, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper.
How when?
Darius ran a hand through his dark hair, his face etched with a mixture of pain and regret. It was a long time ago, he said, his voice rough. Before you and Thomas, before Redemption Creek. We were friends of a sort. Back when I was a different man. He paused, his gaze shifting to the distant hills, as if searching for answers in the starlit sky. We rode together, worked together, got into trouble together. We were young, reckless, full of dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields. Clem listened, mesmerized, as Darius slowly, reluctantly, unraveled the threads of his past. He spoke of a life she had never known, a life of hardship, adventure, and danger. A life far removed from the quiet, orderly existence she had shared with Thomas in Redemption Creek. We found gold, Darius continued, his voice low. Enough to make us rich. Enough to start a new life. But things went wrong. There was a dispute, a fight, a betrayal. Thomas was wounded.
Badly.
Clem felt a sharp pang of grief, a familiar ache in her heart. She had always known that Thomas's death had been sudden, unexpected, but she had never known the details. The sheriff had told her it was an accident, a mining accident. A lie she now realized. I tried to save him, Darius said, his voice choked with emotion. I got him to a doctor, but it was too late. He knew he was dying. He made me promise, he made me swear on my life that I'd look after you, that I'd make sure you were safe. Clem's eyes filled with tears, tears of grief, of confusion, of a strange, overwhelming sense of gratitude. He told me about you, Darius continued, about your dreams, your hopes, your plans to open a dress shop. He loved you, Clementine, more than anything. He reached out and gently wiped away a tear that had trickled down her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver of warmth through her. I try to keep my promise, he said. From a distance. I watched you, made sure you were all right. But I couldn't come to you. Not then. I was still running. From the law, from my past, from myself. He paused, his eyes searching hers. The stagecoach robbery, he said. It wasn't about the money, Clementine. It was about you. I needed to see you, to talk to you, to explain. Explain what? Clem asked, her voice trembling. Why you became an outlaw. Why you broke the law, terrorized innocent people. He flinched, his eyes darkening with pain.
It's not that simple, he said.
There are forces at play. People who want me dead. People who would use you to get to me. Clem remembered Clay Harden, his unsettling presence, his veiled threats. A chill ran down her spine. Who?
She asked. Who wants you dead?
Darius hesitated, then shook his head. It doesn't matter, he said. What matters is that you're in danger. Because of me. Because of my past. Because of the promise I made to Thomas. He took a step closer, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. I won't let them hurt you, Clementine, he said. I swear it. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. His words, spoken with such intensity, such conviction, sent a wave of conflicting emotions through her. Fear, yes, but also trust. A strange, inexplicable trust in a man who was, by all accounts, an outlaw, a criminal. The price of freedom, she realized, was often paid in blood, in sacrifice, in the constant struggle against the forces that sought to extinguish its flame. And Darius Tate, the stagecoach bandit, the man who had haunted her dreams, was now offering to pay that price for her. He was offering to be her protector, her shield against the storm. But could she trust him? Could she accept his protection, knowing the danger it entailed? The answer, she knew, was far from simple. It was a choice that would determine not only her future, but his as well. The echoes of a forgotten promise had brought them together, but the present held a danger that could tear them apart forever. Chapter 8. Between the Law and the Longing. The Founders' Day celebration reached its peak the following day. The town square was a riot of color, music, and laughter. Children chased each other through the crowds, their faces smeared with candy and excitement. Couples danced to the lively tunes of a fiddle band, their boots kicking up dust in the afternoon sun. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meat, freshly baked pies, and the sweet scent of cotton candy. Clem, however, found it difficult to share in the general merriment. Darius's revelation, his confession of a past intertwined with Thomas's, had shaken her to her core. She felt like she was walking on shifting sand, unsure of where to place her trust, unsure of what to believe. She tried to lose herself in the festivities, helping to serve food at one of the booths, chatting with her neighbors, forcing a smile whenever someone asked about the robbery. But her mind kept returning to Darius, to his words, to his eyes, to the strange, undeniable connection she felt with him. She saw Clay harden several times, always on the periphery of the crowd, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't approach her, didn't speak to her, but his presence was a constant, unsettling reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the surface of the celebration. Late in the afternoon, Sheriff Brody approached Clem, his face etched with concern. "Clem," he said, his voice low, "I need to talk to you. In private." She followed him to his office, a small, sparsely furnished room at the back of the town hall. He closed the door behind them, his expression serious. "I've been hearing things, Clem," he said. "Rumors. Whispers. About you and Darius Tate." Clem felt her cheeks flush. She had known this was coming, but she still felt a pang of anxiety. "What kind of rumors?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Folks are saying he's been seen around town," he said. "That he's been talking to you." Clem hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She didn't want to lie to the sheriff, but she also didn't want to betray Darius's confidence. "He returned my belongings," she said, choosing her words carefully. "After the robbery." The sheriff nodded, his eyes studying her face. "I know," he said. "And I know about the letter. The one he found in your strongbox." Clem's eyes widened. "How did he know about that?" "Martha," the sheriff said, answering her unspoken question. "She saw you reading it. She said you were upset." Clem looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It was from my husband," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A letter I thought I'd lost." The sheriff was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. "Clem," he said, "I know you've been through a lot. And I know Tate can be persuasive. But he's a dangerous man. He's wanted for robbery, for other things. I can't let him endanger you, or anyone else in this town." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I need you to tell me the truth, Clem," he said. "Have you seen him? Have you talked to him? Do you know where he is?" Clem felt torn. She was caught between the law, represented by the sheriff, a man she respected and trusted, and the longing, the inexplicable connection she felt with Darius, a man who had broken the law but had also shown her unexpected kindness. A man who had, apparently, been a friend to her late husband. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I've seen him. I've talked to him." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Where?" he asked. "Here," Clem said. "In Redemption Creek. He came to my shop." "When?" "Last night," she admitted. The sheriff leaned forward, his voice urgent. "What did he want, Clem?" he asked. "What did he say?" She hesitated again, then, making a decision. She told him everything. She told him about Darius's promise to Thomas, about his past, about his claim that she was in danger. She told him everything except the way she felt about him. The growing sense of trust, the undeniable attraction, the flicker of hope that he might, just might, be a man worthy of redemption. The sheriff listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each word. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Damn it, Clem," he finally said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I knew it. I knew he was trouble." He stood up, pacing back and forth, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "I have to find him, Clem," he said. "I have to bring him in. Before he gets you killed." The law and the longing. Two opposing forces, pulling her in different directions. Clem knew the sheriff was right, that Darius was a danger, that she should help him bring him to justice. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, that Darius wasn't just a cold-blooded outlaw, that he was a man caught in a web of circumstances, a man fighting for something more than just survival. The choice was hers, betray him to the law, or follow the dangerous, uncertain path of her heart. And the consequences of that choice would ripple far beyond the confines of Redemption Creek. Chapter 9. A Dance with Danger's Embrace. The final night of the Founders' Day celebration arrived, cloaked in a velvet darkness punctuated by the flickering light of lanterns and the warm glow of bonfires. The town square pulsed with a frenetic energy, a last burst of revelry before the return to everyday life. Music, laughter, and the murmur of voices filled the air, creating a vibrant tapestry of sound. Clem, however, felt detached from the festivities. The sheriff's words, his warning, his determination to capture Darius, had cast a long shadow over her heart. She had spent the day wrestling with her conscience, torn between her loyalty to the law and the growing pull she felt towards the outlaw. She had decided, after much agonizing, that she couldn't betray Darius. Not yet. She needed to understand him, to unravel the mystery of his past, to discover the truth behind his claims of danger. She needed to know if the connection she felt with him was real, or just a figment of her grief-stricken imagination. She had agreed to meet Darius, secretly, after the celebration, near the old abandoned mine outside of town. It was a risky rendezvous, a dangerous dance with the very man the sheriff was hunting. But she felt compelled to go, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. As she made her way through the crowded square, she saw Clay Harden standing near the edge of the dance floor, his eyes scanning the crowd. He caught her gaze and gave her a slow, knowing smile. A shiver of unease ran down her spine. He seemed to know everything, to see through her carefully constructed facade. She avoided his gaze, quickening her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. She slipped away from the square unnoticed and headed towards the outskirts of town. The old mine was a desolate, eerie place, a gaping hole in the earth surrounded by crumbling timbers and rusted machinery. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows, creating an atmosphere of foreboding. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of the wind through the dry brush. Darius was waiting for her, leaning against a weathered wooden post, his figure silhouetted against the moonlit sky. He looked up as she approached, his eyes searching hers. "Clementine," he said, his voice soft. "You came." "I did," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need to understand Darius. I need to know the truth." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know," he said. "And I'll tell you everything. But first I need to tell you something else." He took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Clementine," he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper that seemed to vibrate in the night air. The words, unexpected, shocking, took her breath away. She stared at him, her mind reeling, her heart pounding. "Darius," she began, her voice trembling. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. "I know it's crazy," he said. "I know I'm an outlaw, a wanted man. I know I have nothing to offer you but danger and uncertainty. But I can't help it. I've never felt this way about anyone, not even before." His eyes, filled with a raw, vulnerable emotion, held hers captive. She saw a reflection of her own feelings, a mirroring of the longing, the attraction, the undeniable connection she had tried to deny. She stammered, her voice choked with emotion. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. "Just tell me one thing," Clementine, he whispered. Do you feel it too? Do you feel anything for me? She hesitated, her mind warring with her heart. The law, the sheriff, the danger, the whispers of Redemption Creek all faded into the background. In that moment, there was only Darius, his eyes, his touch, his words, his undeniable presence. Yes, she whispered, the word a barely audible sigh. I do. He closed the distance between them, his lips brushing against hers, tentatively at first, then with a growing urgency. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desperation, of a love born in the shadows, a love that defied the odds, a love that might very well be their undoing. As they embraced, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, alone under the vast, starlit sky. But the danger, the uncertainty, the threat that loomed over them, was still there, a silent, unseen presence waiting to shatter their fragile moment of peace. And in the distance, the faint sound of approaching horses, the muffled voices of men, signaled that their dance with danger had only just begun. Chapter 10. The Unmasking of Hidden Truths. The sound of approaching horses shattered the stillness of the night, pulling Clem and Darius apart. They stood, frozen, listening intently, their hearts pounding in unison. It's the sheriff, Darius said, his voice grim. He must have followed you. Clem's mind raced. She had been careful, she thought, making sure she wasn't followed. But the sheriff was a seasoned lawman, and Redemption Creek was his territory. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Darius looked around, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. We can't stay here, he said. He'll find us. He grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the entrance of the abandoned mine.
Come on, he said.
We can hide in there. Clem hesitated. The mine was dark, dangerous, a labyrinth of tunnels and shafts. But she had no other choice. She followed Darius, her boots crunching on the loose gravel, her heart pounding with fear. They entered the mine, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The only light came from the faint sliver of moon visible at the entrance, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Darius led her deeper into the mine, his hand gripping hers tightly. They moved slowly, carefully, navigating the treacherous tunnels, the silence broken only by the sound of their breathing and the occasional drip of water. I'm sorry, Clementine, Darius said, his voice a low whisper. I never meant to put you in danger. It's not your fault, Clem replied, her voice shaking slightly. I chose to come. They reached a wider chamber, a cavernous space where the mine shaft opened up above them, allowing a faint circle of moonlight to filter down. Darius stopped, pulling her close. We'll be safe here for a while, he said. They won't find us in the dark. They sat down on a pile of loose rocks, their backs against the cold, damp wall. Clem shivered, both from the cold and from fear. Darius, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Who is it? Who wants you dead? He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. It's a long story, Clementine, he said. A complicated one. I have time, she replied, her voice firm. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. It goes back to the gold fields, he said. To the betrayal I told you about. The man who shot Thomas, his name was Rex Claiborne. Clem gasped. The name was familiar, a whisper from the past, a name associated with wealth, power, and ruthlessness. Claiborne was a prominent figure in the territory, a wealthy landowner, a cattle baron, a man with connections to the railroad, to the territorial governor, to everyone. Claiborne? She asked, her voice incredulous. But he's untouchable. Darius nodded, his expression grim. He is, he said. He has the law in his pocket, the judges, the politicians. He's been after me ever since that day in the gold fields. He wants to silence me, to make sure the truth about Thomas's death never comes out. The truth? Clem asked, her brow furrowing. What truth? Darius looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. Claiborne didn't just shoot Thomas, he said. He stole our claim. He framed me for the murder. He made it look like I killed Thomas in a fight over the gold. Clem's mind reeled. The story was twisting, turning, revealing a web of deceit and corruption far more intricate than she could have imagined.
But why? She asked.
Why would he do that? Greed, Darius said, his voice bitter.
Pure unadulterated greed.
Our claim was rich, Clementine. Richer than anyone knew. Claiborne wanted it all. And he got it. He paused, his gaze fixed on the faint circle of moonlight above them. I've been running ever since, he said. Trying to stay one step ahead of him, trying to find a way to clear my name, to bring him to justice. But it's been impossible. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. That's why I returned your things, he said. That's why I came back. I couldn't let Claiborne use you to get to me. And I couldn't stay away. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the mine. A voice Clem recognized.
Clay Hardin.
Darius. Hardin called out. I know you're in here. Come out and face me. Clem's blood ran cold.
Hardin.
He wasn't just a drifter, a curious bystander. He was working for Claiborne. He was the hunter, and Darius was the prey. And she, Clem, was caught in the middle. Darius stood up, his hand reaching for his gun.
Stay here, Clementine, he said.
Don't move.
Thaddeus, no. She cried.
Don't go out there. It's a trap. He smiled, a sad, weary smile. It's always been a trap, Clementine, he said. But I can't run anymore. I have to face him. I have to end this. He turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clem alone in the cold, damp chamber, her heart pounding with fear, her mind racing with a desperate hope that he would somehow survive. The unmasking of hidden truths had revealed a conspiracy that reached far beyond the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, a conspiracy that threatened to consume them all. And the final confrontation was about to begin. Chapter 11. Trials by Fire and Fury. Clem waited, huddled in the darkness, her ears straining for any sound from the tunnels beyond. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water and the frantic beating of her own heart. She imagined Darius, moving stealthily through the mine, his senses alert, his hand on his gun. She imagined Clay Hardin, his face twisted with malice, his eyes searching for his prey. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Clem's fear grew with each passing moment, a cold, suffocating dread that threatened to overwhelm her. She prayed, silently, desperately, for Darius's safety, for a miracle that would somehow save him from Claiborne's clutches. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the roar of gunfire. The sound echoed through the mine, reverberating off the walls, shaking the very ground beneath her feet. Clem gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her body trembling uncontrollably. More shots followed, a rapid volley of gunfire that seemed to go on forever. Then silence. A silence even more terrifying than the gunfire. Clem couldn't stay put any longer. She had to know what had happened. She had to know if Darius was alive. She stood up, her legs shaky, her body stiff with fear. She stumbled forward, groping her way through the darkness, her hands outstretched, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed the sound of the gunfire, her boots crunching on the loose gravel, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She rounded a corner, her eyes straining to see through the gloom. Then she saw them. Darius and Clay Hardin were locked in a brutal struggle, their bodies grappling, their faces contorted with rage. They were near the entrance of the mine, where the moonlight filtered in, illuminating the scene with a pale, ethereal glow. Hardin had Darius pinned against the wall, his gun pressed against Darius's temple. Darius was struggling, trying to break free, his face covered in sweat and blood. It's over, Tate, Hardin snarled. Claiborne sends his regards. Clem's heart stopped. She had to do something, anything, to save Darius. She looked around desperately, her eyes searching for a weapon, anything she could use. She spotted a loose rock, about the size of her fist, lying on the ground nearby. She picked it up, her hands trembling, her mind racing. She had never hurt anyone in her life, never even considered violence. But she knew she had to act, and act fast. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then, with all her strength, she threw the rock. It struck Hardin on the side of the head with a sickening thud. He staggered, his grip on Darius loosening. Darius seized the opportunity, shoving Hardin away, sending him sprawling to the ground. Darius turned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw Clem standing there, her face pale, her body trembling. "Clementine," he exclaimed. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay put." I couldn't," she stammered. "I had to help." Hardin was groaning, struggling to get to his feet, his hand clutching his head. He looked up, his eyes filled with rage, and saw Clem. "You," he snarled. "You'll pay for that." He lunged towards her, his hand reaching for his gun. Darius reacted instantly, stepping in front of Clem, shielding her with his body. He fired his gun, a single shot that echoed through the mine. Hardin crumpled to the ground, his body still, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Silence descended once more, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the sound of Darius's ragged breathing. He turned to Clem, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded, her body still trembling. She couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to express the terror she had felt, the relief that washed over her now. Darius reached out and gently pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his body shaking with the aftermath of the struggle. "It's okay, Clementine," he whispered. "It's over. You're safe." But it wasn't over. Not yet. The sheriff and his posse were still out there, searching for Darius. Claiborne was still out there, his power, his influence, his ruthlessness still a threat. They had survived this trial by fire, this brutal confrontation in the darkness of the mine. But the larger battle, the fight for justice, for freedom, for their future, was far from over. They had faced the fury of Claiborne's henchmen, but the true test was yet to come. And they would face it together. Chapter 12. The Heart's Uncharted Territory. The sound of approaching voices and the flickering light of lanterns signaled the arrival of the sheriff and his posse. Darius and Clem emerged from the mine, their hands raised, their faces grim. The sheriff, his face etched with concern and relief, rushed towards them.
"Clem,"
he exclaimed. "Are you all right? What happened in there?" Clem, still shaken from the confrontation with Hardin, could only nod. Darius stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "It's over, Sheriff," he said. "Hardin's dead. He was working for Claiborne." The sheriff's eyes widened, his gaze shifting to the body lying just inside the mine entrance. He knelt down, examining the wound, his expression hardening. "Claiborne," he muttered, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "I knew it. I should have known." He stood up, turning to Darius. "Tate," he said, his voice heavy with conflicting emotions, "I should arrest you. You're a wanted man. But you saved Clem's life. And you've given me evidence, proof of Claiborne's crimes." He paused, his gaze shifting between Darius and Clem. "I'm going to make a deal with you, Tate," he said. "You help me bring Claiborne down, and I'll do everything in my power to clear your name. To get you a pardon." Darius hesitated, his eyes searching Clem's. She met his gaze, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She knew this was a dangerous gamble, a risky alliance with the law. But she also knew it was their only chance, their only hope for a future together. "All right, Sheriff," Darius said, his voice firm. "I'll do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Darius, working with the sheriff, provided detailed information about Claiborne's operations, his network of informants, his corrupt dealings. He revealed the location of hidden documents, incriminating evidence that proved Claiborne's involvement in Thomas's murder and the theft of the gold claim. Clem, meanwhile, found herself caught in a strange, unsettling limbo. She was relieved that Darius was alive, that he was working with the sheriff, that there was a chance, however slim, for him to be cleared of the charges against him. But she was also acutely aware of the danger that still surrounded them, the threat that Claiborne posed. She spent her days at her shop, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but her mind was constantly racing, replaying the events in the mine, worrying about Darius, wondering what the future held. One evening, as she was closing up shop, Darius appeared at the door. He looked tired, worn, but there was a new light in his eyes, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before.
"Clementine," he said, his voice soft. "Can I talk to you?"
She nodded, her heart skipping a beat. She led him inside, closing the door behind them. "How's it going?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He smiled, a weary but genuine smile.
"It's going," he said.
Slowly but surely. The sheriff's gathering evidence, building a case. "It won't be easy, but we have a chance." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I wanted to thank you, Clementine," he said, "for what you did in the mine. You saved my life." She blushed, looking down at her hands.
"You saved mine too," she said.
He reached out and gently lifted her chin, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You're a brave woman, Clementine Hollister," he said. "Braver than you know." His eyes, filled with a mixture of admiration and affection, held hers captive. She felt a familiar warmth spread through her, a longing that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "Darius," she began, her voice trembling slightly. What happens now? After all this is over?" He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "That depends," he said, his voice low.
"On you."
"On what you want." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I told you I was falling in love with you, Clementine," he said. "And I meant it. But I know I have nothing to offer you. Not yet. Not until my name is cleared. Not until Claiborne is brought to justice." He took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. "But if there's a chance, Clementine," he said. "If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I want to build a life with you. A real life. Here, in Redemption Creek. Or anywhere you want to go." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She had been so afraid to hope, so afraid to dream of a future that seemed impossible. But now, standing here with Darius, hearing his words, seeing the love in his eyes, she dared to believe. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Darius. There's a chance. A very good chance." He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his face. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. He kissed her, a long, tender kiss that sealed their unspoken promise, a kiss that spoke of hope, of love, of a future they would build together, a future carved out of the heart's uncharted territory. The dangers were still real, the path uncertain, but they now faced them together, two hearts bound by a love forged in the crucible of adversity. Chapter 13. Blood on the Desert Sands. The news of Clay Hardin's death and Darius's collaboration with the sheriff spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. Opinions were divided. Some hailed Darius as a hero, a man wrongly accused, a victim of Claiborne's greed. Others condemned him as an outlaw, a criminal who deserved to be hanged, regardless of his newfound alliance with the law. The town was on edge, the atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty. Claiborne, however, remained silent, seemingly untouchable in his sprawling ranch outside of town. He had the law in his pocket, the judges, the politicians. He was a powerful man, a dangerous man, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. Sheriff Brody, bolstered by Darius's information and the evidence he had gathered, knew he had to act quickly. He deputized several trusted men, forming a posse to ride out to Claiborne's ranch and arrest him. Darius, despite Clem's protests, insisted on joining them. "It's my fight, Clementine," he said, his voice firm. "I have to see it through. I have to face him." Clem, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and pride, could only nod. She knew he was right. This was his chance for redemption, his chance to clear his name, his chance to finally put an end to Claiborne's reign of terror. As the posse rode out of town, Clem stood on the porch of her shop, watching them disappear into the dust, her heart pounding with a desperate hope that they would all return safely. The confrontation at Claiborne's ranch was swift and brutal. Claiborne, surrounded by his hired guns, refused to surrender. A gunfight erupted, the air filled with the roar of gunfire, the screams of men, the the smell of gunpowder and blood. Darius, fighting alongside the sheriff and his men, proved his courage and his loyalty. He fought with a fierce determination, a desperate need to finally bring Claiborne to justice. The battle raged across the ranch, from the sprawling main house to the dusty corrals, from the bunkhouse to the stables. Men fell on both sides, their blood staining the desert sands. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the gunfight ended. Claiborne's men were either dead or captured. Claiborne himself, wounded and cornered, was taken into custody by Sheriff Brody. But the victory came at a price. Several of the sheriff's men were wounded, and one, a young deputy named Jed, was killed. Darius, too, had been injured. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, leaving a bloody gash. When the posse returned to Redemption Creek, Clem rushed to Darius's side, her heart filled with relief and concern. She saw the blood on his shirt, the pained expression on his face, and her fear returned. "Darius,"
she cried.
"You're hurt." He smiled, a weary but reassuring smile.
"It's nothing, Clementine," he said. "Just a scratch."
She helped him off his horse, supporting him as they walked towards her shop. She cleaned and bandaged his wound, her hands trembling, her heart aching with every wince of pain he couldn't hide. As she tended to his injury, she realized how close she had come to losing him, how fragile their newfound hope really was. The blood on the desert sands was a stark reminder of the violence that had brought them together, the violence that still threatened to tear them apart. "It's over, Clementine," Darius said, his voice hoarse. "Claiborne's finished. He'll face trial, and this time, he won't be able to buy his way out." Clem nodded, her eyes filled with tears.
"I know," she said.
"But Jed, he's dead. And you could have been killed." He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears.
"I'm here, Clementine," he said. "I'm alive.
And I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her a long, tender kiss that spoke of gratitude, of relief, of a love that had survived the storm. The blood had been spilled, the battle fought, but the war, at least for them, was finally over. Claiborne's reign of terror had ended, and a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope and the promise of a future together, was about to begin. But the scars, both visible and invisible, would remain, a reminder of the price they had paid for their freedom. Chapter 14. Reckoning Under a Cruel Sunday. The trial of Rex Claiborne was the biggest event in Redemption Creek's history. People came from miles around, filling the town square, crowding the courthouse, eager to witness the downfall of the man who had ruled the territory with an iron fist for so long. The courthouse, a small, unassuming building, was packed to capacity. The air was thick with anticipation, with tension, with a sense of collective outrage. Clem sat in the front row, her heart pounding, her gaze fixed on Darius, who sat beside Sheriff Brody at the prosecutor's table. Claiborne, dressed in a fine suit, his face pale but defiant, sat at the defendant's table, surrounded by his lawyers, a team of slick, expensive attorneys from the city. He looked out of place in the rustic courthouse, a symbol of the wealth and power he had wielded for so long, a power that was now slipping through his fingers. The trial lasted for days, a grueling parade of witnesses, evidence, and legal arguments. Darius, the star witness, testified with courage and conviction, recounting the events in the gold fields, the betrayal, the murder of Thomas, Claiborne's framing of him for the crime. He spoke with a quiet dignity, his voice filled with emotion, his eyes locking with Claiborne's, challenging him to deny the truth. Clem watched him, her heart swelling with pride and admiration. He was no longer the outlaw, the stagecoach bandit. He was a man fighting for justice, a man seeking redemption, a man she loved. Claiborne's lawyers tried to discredit Darius, painting him as a liar, a criminal, a man with a motive to fabricate the story. They attacked his character, his past, his reputation. But Darius stood firm, unwavering in his testimony, his honesty shining through the cloud of accusations. Sheriff Brody presented the evidence, the documents, the testimonies of other witnesses, building a damning case against Claiborne. He exposed Claiborne's corruption, his bribery, his intimidation tactics, his ruthless pursuit of wealth and power. Clem, too, was called to testify. She spoke of her encounter with Darius on the stagecoach, of the letter he had returned to her, of his promise to Thomas. She spoke of her fear, her confusion, her growing trust in a man who had once been her enemy. Her testimony, though brief, was powerful. It corroborated Darius's story, adding another layer of credibility to his claims. It also revealed her own journey, her transformation from a grieving widow to a woman who had found love and hope in the most unexpected of places. Finally, after days of testimony and arguments, the case went to the jury. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a collective breath held captive, waiting for the verdict. The jury deliberated for hours, their deliberations stretching into the night. Clem waited, her nerves frayed, her heart pounding, her future hanging in the balance. As the sun began to rise, casting a harsh, unforgiving light across the desert landscape, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the foreman as he stood to deliver the verdict. "We, the jury," he read, his voice clear and steady, "find the defendant, Rex Claiborne, guilty of murder in the first degree, theft, and conspiracy." A collective gasp filled the courtroom, followed by a roar of applause, of cheers, of relief. Clem's eyes filled with tears, tears of joy, of gratitude, of vindication. She looked at Darius, his face etched with a mixture of relief and triumph. He had done it. He had cleared his name. He had brought Claiborne to justice. Claiborne, his face ashen, his eyes filled with rage and disbelief, slumped in his chair. His reign of terror was over. The reckoning under the cruel sun had finally come. As Claiborne was led away in handcuffs, Darius turned to Clem, his eyes shining with a love that had been tested by fire, a love that had endured the storm. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "It's over, Clementine," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's finally over." The trial was a turning point, a moment of justice, a moment of redemption. But it was also a beginning, a new chapter in their lives, a chapter they would write together, under a sky no longer clouded by fear and uncertainty. The cruel sun had exposed the darkness, but it had also illuminated the path towards a brighter future. Chapter 15. The Ghost of Yesterday's Choices. With Claiborne's conviction and imprisonment, a sense of peace, long absent, settled over Redemption Creek. The town, relieved to be free from the tyrant's grip, slowly began to heal. Businesses thrived, neighbors helped neighbors, and the annual Founders' Day celebration, postponed due to the turmoil, was finally rescheduled, promising a joyous and hopeful event. Darius, his name officially cleared by a territorial pardon secured by Sheriff Brody's efforts, was no longer an outlaw. He was a free man, a respected member of the community, a man who had faced his past and emerged victorious. He and Clem spent their days together, rebuilding their lives, exploring their newfound love. They walked hand in hand through the town, sharing quiet moments on the porch of her shop, their conversations filled with laughter, with plans, with a shared dream of a future together. But even amidst the joy and the peace, a ghost lingered, a shadow from the past that threatened to darken their happiness. It was the ghost of Thomas, of the life Clem had shared with him, of the love she had thought lost forever. One evening, as Clem and Darius were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Clem spoke of her feelings, her confusion, her lingering grief. "I loved Thomas, Darius," she said, her voice soft, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. "I loved him with all my heart, and I thought I would never love again." Darius nodded, his expression understanding. "I know," he said, "and I would never ask you to forget him. He was a good man, a brave man. He was my friend." But Clem hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel guilty. Guilty for loving you, for moving on, for finding happiness again." Darius reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Clementine, he said, his voice firm but gentle, you have nothing to feel guilty about. Thomas wouldn't want you to live in the past, to mourn him forever. He would want you to be happy, to find love, to live your life to the fullest. He paused, his gaze searching hers. He made me promise to protect you, he said. And I did. But I also fell in love with you. And I believe, with all my heart, that Thomas would understand. That he would approve. Clem's eyes filled with tears. Tears of relief, of acceptance, of a growing sense of peace. She had been carrying the burden of guilt, of grief for so long, afraid to embrace her newfound happiness, afraid to betray the memory of Thomas. I miss him, Darius, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I always will.
I know, he said.
And that's okay. You can love me and still love him. Your heart is big enough, Clementine. It's big enough for both of us. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. He kissed her a long, tender kiss that spoke of understanding, of compassion, of a love that transcended the boundaries of time and loss. As they sat there, embraced in the twilight, Clem realized that Darius was right. She could love him and still honor the memory of Thomas. She could move forward, embrace the future, without forgetting the past. The ghost of yesterday's choices, the shadow of grief and guilt, began to fade, replaced by the warmth of Darius's love, by the promise of a new beginning. She had found peace, not in forgetting, but in accepting, in integrating the past into the present, in allowing love to heal the wounds of loss. The future was still uncertain, but it was no longer a source of fear. It was a source of hope, a canvas upon which they would paint their shared dreams, a testament to the enduring power of love to overcome even the darkest of shadows. Chapter 16. Where Trust Lies Bleeding. The rescheduled Founders' Day celebration arrived, bringing with it a renewed sense of optimism and community spirit. Redemption Creek was buzzing with excitement, the town square decorated with colorful banners, the air filled with music, laughter, and the aroma of festive foods. Clem and Darius, hand in hand, strolled through the crowds, enjoying the festivities, their presence a symbol of the town's resilience, a testament to their shared journey through darkness and into light. They danced to the lively tunes of the fiddle band, shared a plate of roasted meat and freshly baked pie, and watched the children play games, their faces beaming with joy. But even amidst the celebration, a subtle unease lingered, a sense of unfinished business. Sheriff Brody, though relieved by Claiborne's imprisonment, was still investigating the extent of his corruption, searching for any remaining accomplices, any hidden threats that might still lurk in the shadows. One evening, as Clem and Darius were walking home from the celebration, they encountered Sheriff Brody, his face etched with concern. Clem, Darius, he said, his voice low, I need to talk to you. In private. They followed him to his office, the festive atmosphere of the town square fading behind them, replaced by a sense of foreboding. I've been doing some digging, the sheriff said, his voice grim. Following up on some leads related to Claiborne's network. And I've found something unsettling. He paused, his gaze shifting between Darius and Clem. There's evidence, he said, that Claiborne had an informant. Someone in Redemption Creek. Someone who was feeding him information, helping him stay one step ahead of the law. Clem's heart skipped a beat. An informant? In Redemption Creek? Someone they knew? Someone they trusted?
Who?
Darius asked, his voice sharp. The sheriff hesitated, his expression troubled.
I don't have a name yet, he said.
But the evidence points to someone close to you, Clem. Someone who knew about your connection to Darius, someone who knew about the letter, someone who had access to your shop. Clem's mind raced. Someone close to her? Someone she trusted? Her neighbors, her customers, her friends, who could it be? A wave of nausea washed over her. The thought of betrayal, of a hidden enemy lurking among those she considered friends, was sickening. I don't understand, she stammered. Who would do such a thing? The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Greed, jealousy, revenge, there are many motives, Clem, he said. But I'll find them. I promise you that. He turned to Darius. Tate, he said, I need your help. You know Claiborne's methods, his tactics. You might be able to see something I've missed. Darius nodded, his expression determined. I'll do whatever I can, Sheriff, he said. As they left the sheriff's office, Clem felt a chill run down her spine. The trust she had so carefully rebuilt, the sense of community she had cherished, had been shattered. The foundation of Redemption Creek, once solid and secure, now seemed riddled with cracks, with hidden fissures of deceit and betrayal. Who was the informant? And how many people were they close to? She looked at Darius, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and determination. She knew he would help the sheriff find the truth, but she also knew that the search would be painful, that it would likely expose secrets, betrayals, and wounds that had long been hidden. The trust, she realized, was the most fragile thing. When broken, could stain a community, and the consequences of the broken trust could bleed through the joy of Redemption Creek. The celebration continued. The music played. The laughter echoed. But beneath the surface, a darkness lurked, a threat that could unravel the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. And the hunt for the truth, the search for the betrayer, had just begun. Chapter 17. A Haven in the Storm's Eye. The days following the sheriff's revelation were filled with a quiet tension, a sense of unease that permeated Redemption Creek. Clem found herself looking at her neighbors, her customers, even her friends, with a new suspicion, a questioning gaze that she couldn't quite conceal. She confided in Darius, sharing her fears, her doubts, her growing sense of isolation. He listened patiently, his presence a source of strength and comfort, his love a beacon in the growing darkness. It's like a disease, Darius, she said, her voice trembling. This suspicion, this distrust it's spreading, infecting everything. He held her close, his arms wrapping around her, his voice a soothing balm to her troubled soul. I know, Clementine, he said, but we'll get through this. We'll find the truth, and we'll expose the betrayer. And we'll rebuild the trust, stronger than before. They worked with Sheriff Brody, reviewing his evidence, analyzing the information he had gathered, searching for any clue, any hint that might lead them to the informant. Darius, with his knowledge of Claiborne's methods and his own experience as an outsider, proved invaluable in the investigation. One evening, as they were poring over the sheriff's notes in Clem's shop, Darius noticed something, a small detail that had been overlooked. Look at this, Clem, he said, pointing to a list of names, a record of people who had visited Claiborne's ranch in the months leading up to his arrest. There's a name here, Martha Jenkins, the store owner. Clem's eyes widened. Martha? The kindly, gossipy woman who ran the general store? The woman who had been so sympathetic, so curious about the robbery, so seemingly harmless? Martha? She asked, her voice incredulous. But she's always been so kind to me. She's like a friend. Darius nodded, his expression grim. I know, he said. But it makes sense. She had access to information, to gossip, to everything that was happening in town. She knew about your connection to me, about the letter, about everything. Clem felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The betrayal cut deep, a wound inflicted by someone she had trusted, someone she had considered a friend. But why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would she do such a thing? Darius sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. We don't know yet, he said. But we'll find out. We have to. They decided to confront Martha, to present her with the evidence, to demand an explanation. It was a risky move, a dangerous confrontation, but they had no other choice. They found Martha at her store, closing up for the evening. She greeted them with a smile, her eyes twinkling with her usual gossipy curiosity. Clem, Darius, she exclaimed. What brings you two lovebirds here so late? Darius stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. Martha, he said, we need to talk to you. About Claiborne. About the information you were giving him. Martha's smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing with suspicion. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Darius presented her with the evidence, the list of names, the sheriff's notes, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Martha's face crumbled, her carefully constructed facade of innocence collapsing under the weight of the truth. Tears streamed down her face, her body shaking with sobs. I had no choice, she cried. He threatened me. He threatened my family. He said he would hurt them if I didn't cooperate. Clem felt a mixture of anger, pity, and a profound sense of disappointment. She had trusted Martha, confided in her, considered her a friend. And all along, Martha had been betraying her, feeding information to the very man who had threatened her life. Martha revealed Claiborne held her family's ranch deed and threatened to take it. I'm so sorry, Clem, Martha sobbed. I never meant to hurt you. I was just scared. Darius and Clem, despite their anger, they couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Martha. She had been caught in a terrible situation, forced to make an impossible choice. They took Martha to the sheriff, where she confessed everything, revealing the full extent of her involvement with Claiborne. The sheriff, though saddened by Martha's betrayal, assured her that he would do everything in his power to protect her and her family. With Martha's confession, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Claiborne's network of informants was exposed, his grip on Redemption Creek finally broken. The storm, it seemed, had finally passed. The truth had been revealed, the betrayer exposed, and the trust, though wounded, could begin to heal. Clem and Darius, their love tested by fire, their bond strengthened by adversity, found solace in each other's arms, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of hope, a haven found in the eye of the storm. But the scars of betrayal, the memory of the darkness, would remain. A reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring power of love to overcome even the deepest of wounds. Chapter 18. The Weight of Unspoken Words. With Martha's confession and Claiborne's network dismantled, a sense of relief, albeit tinged with sadness, settled over Redemption Creek. The town, slowly but surely, began to heal, the wounds of betrayal beginning to close, replaced by a cautious optimism, a renewed determination to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Clem, though deeply hurt by Martha's actions, found it in her heart to forgive her. She understood the fear, the desperation, the impossible choice that Martha had faced. She visited her in jail, offering words of comfort and support, assuring her that she didn't blame her, that she understood. Darius, too, extended a hand of forgiveness to Martha, recognizing the difficult circumstances that had led to her betrayal. He knew, better than anyone, the weight of past choices, the burden of guilt and regret. As the days turned into weeks, Clem and Darius focused on their future, on building a life together, on creating a haven of love and trust amidst the lingering shadows of the past. They spent their days working side by side, Clem at her sewing machine, Darius helping with repairs, renovations, and the occasional odd job around town. They talked of marriage, of children, of a future filled with laughter, with love, with a shared commitment to building a home, a family, a life together in Redemption Creek. But even amidst the joy and the planning, a subtle tension lingered, a weight of unspoken words, a barrier that Clem couldn't quite overcome. It was the memory of Darius's past, of his life as an outlaw, of the violence he had witnessed, the violence he had inflicted. She knew he had changed, that he had redeemed himself, that he was a good man, a man she loved with all her heart. But she couldn't quite shake the image of him as a stagecoach robber, as a wanted man, as a figure of danger and uncertainty. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast, inky sky, Clem finally voiced her concerns, her fears, her lingering doubts. Darius, she said, her voice hesitant, her eyes searching his. I love you. I know you've changed. But sometimes I see you, in my mind, as you were, on that stagecoach, with that gun. And it scares me. Darius listened patiently, his expression understanding, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. He knew this conversation was inevitable, that the ghost of his past would eventually surface, casting a shadow on their present. I know, Clementine, he said, his voice soft. And I understand. I can't change the past. I can't erase the things I've done. I can only try to be a better man, to be worthy of your love. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I was a different man then, Clem, he said, driven by anger, by revenge, by a desperate need to survive. I made choices, bad choices, that I'll always regret. He paused, his gaze unwavering. But meeting you, falling in love with you, it changed me, Clementine. It gave me something to live for, something to fight for. It gave me a reason to become a better man. Tears welled up in Clem's eyes, tears of understanding, of acceptance, of a love that had been tested by fire, a love that had endured the storm. I know, Darius, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I know, and I love you.
For who you are now.
For who you're becoming. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. He kissed her, a long, tender kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of redemption, of a love that transcended the boundaries of past mistakes. I'll never hurt you, Clementine, he whispered. I swear it. I'll spend the rest of my life proving my love to you, proving that I'm worthy of your trust. As they sat there, embraced in the starlight, Clem realized that the weight of unspoken words, the burden of his past, had finally been lifted. She had voiced her fears, her doubts, and he had met them with honesty, with understanding, with a love that was stronger than any shadow. The past, she knew, would always be a part of them, a reminder of the journey they had taken, the obstacles they had overcome. But it wouldn't define them. It wouldn't control them. It would simply be a part of their story, a testament to the enduring power of love to heal, to forgive, to transform even the most hardened of hearts. The unspoken words had been spoken, the doubts addressed, and their love, now stronger and more resilient, could finally blossom, free from the constraints of the past. Chapter 19. Clashing Destinies at Dawn. The final preparations for Clem and Darius's wedding were underway. Redemption Creek, seemingly recovered from the recent turmoil, buzzed with excitement, the townsfolk eager to celebrate the union of two people who had become symbols of hope and resilience. Clem, with the help of her friends and neighbors, was busy sewing her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and silk, a symbol of her new beginning, a testament to her enduring spirit. Darius, meanwhile, was overseeing the final touches on the small, rustic chapel they had chosen for the ceremony, a place that held a special significance for them, a place where they had shared quiet moments, whispered promises, and dreams of a future together. But even amidst the joy and the anticipation, a shadow lingered, a sense of unease that Clem couldn't quite shake. It was the knowledge that Claiborne, though imprisoned, was still a powerful man, a man with connections, a man who might still seek revenge. Sheriff Brody, aware of the potential threat, had increased security, posting extra deputies around the town, keeping a close watch on any strangers, any suspicious activity. He assured Clem and Darius that they would be safe, that he would do everything in his power to protect them. But Clem, her instincts honed by a life lived on the edge of danger, couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was amiss, that a storm was brewing on the horizon. One evening, as she and Darius were walking home from the chapel, they noticed a figure lurking in the shadows, a figure that seemed vaguely familiar. They quickened their pace, their hearts pounding, their senses alert. As they drew closer, the figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing himself. It was Clay Hardin's brother, a man named Jake, a man who bore a striking resemblance to his deceased sibling, a man with the same cold, calculating eyes, the same air of menace. Tate, Jake said, his voice a low growl, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. I've been looking for you. Darius stepped in front of Clem, shielding her with his body, his own hand instinctively reaching for his gun. What do you want, Hardin? Darius asked, his voice calm but firm. Jake smiled, a cruel, unsettling smile. Revenge, he said. For my brother. For what you did to him. Your brother was working for Claiborne, Darius said. He tried to kill me. He tried to kill Clementine. I acted in self-defense. Jake laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Self-defense?
He scoffed. You're an outlaw, Tate.
A killer. You deserve to die. He drew his gun, his movements swift and practiced. Darius reacted instantly, drawing his own gun. The two men facing each other in a tense standoff, their destinies about to clash under the fading light of dusk. Clem, her heart pounding with fear, cried out, "Darius, no. Don't do it." But it was too late. The silence was shattered by the roar of gunfire, the bullets flying, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and the promise of death. Darius and Jake exchanged shots, their movements blurring, their aim deadly. Clem watched in horror, her body trembling, her mind racing, praying for a miracle, for Darius to survive. Jake fired again, and Darius staggered, a bullet grazing his arm. He stumbled, but he didn't fall. He raised his gun, his aim steady, his eyes focused, and fired a single shot. Jake crumpled to the ground, his body still, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Silence descended once more, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the sound of Clem's sobs. She rushed to Darius's side, her hands reaching for him, her eyes searching for injuries. He was bleeding, his arms soaked in blood, but he was alive. "Darius,"
she cried.
"Are you all right?" He smiled, a weak, pained smile. "I'm fine, Clementine," he said. "Just a scratch." Sheriff Brody and his deputies arrived, drawn by the sound of gunfire. They took in the scene, their faces grim, their expressions a mixture of relief and concern. "It's over, Sheriff," Darius said, his voice hoarse. "It's finally over." The clashing destinies had met at dawn's approach. It was the symbolic sunrise to the wedding day. The final threat, the last vestige of Claiborne's influence, had been extinguished. But the violence, the bloodshed, the constant threat of danger, had taken its toll. Clem and Darius had survived, but they were scarred, both physically and emotionally. The wedding, meant to be a celebration of love and hope, now seemed overshadowed by the darkness they had endured, by the constant struggle for survival that had defined their lives. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. The wedding day dawned, bright and clear, the sky a vast expanse of blue, the desert air crisp and cool. But despite the beauty of the day, a somber mood hung over Redemption Creek. The gunfight with Jake Harden, the constant threat of violence, the lingering shadows of the past, had cast a pall over the celebrations. Clem, dressed in her beautiful white gown, stood before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her, a mixture of joy and trepidation in her eyes. She was marrying the man she loved, the man who had fought for her, protected her, redeemed himself in her eyes. But she couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the fear that something might still go wrong, that their happiness might be snatched away from them at the last moment. Darius, too, felt the weight of the past, the burden of his choices, the constant struggle for survival that had defined his life. He stood at the altar, his heart pounding, his gaze fixed on the door, waiting for Clem to appear. He was ready to commit his life to her, to build a future together, to create a haven of love and peace amidst the chaos of the world. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't deserve her, that his past would always haunt them, that he would never be truly free from the shadows. As the music began and Clem, radiant and beautiful, walked down the aisle, escorted by Sheriff Brody, Darius's doubts began to fade, replaced by a surge of love, of gratitude, of a fierce determination to protect her, to cherish her, to make her happy. They exchanged their vows, their voices filled with emotion, their eyes locked in a gaze of unwavering love. They promised to love each other, to honor each other, to support each other, through good times and bad, through sickness and health, until death did them part. But even as they spoke the words, a sense of unease lingered, a feeling that the final confrontation was yet to come, not a confrontation of guns and violence, but a confrontation of hearts and horizons, a reckoning with the past, a decision about their future. As they were pronounced husband and wife, and Darius leaned in to kiss his bride, a strange calm settled over Clem. The fear, the doubt, the unease that had plagued her for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace, of acceptance, of a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more resilient. The reception was held in the town square, a celebration of love, of hope, of a new beginning. The townsfolk, their spirits lifted by the union of Clem and Darius, gathered to offer their congratulations, their blessings, their support. But as the evening drew to a close, Clem and Darius knew they had a decision to make, a choice that would determine the course of their lives together. They had to decide whether to stay in Redemption Creek, to face the ghosts of the past, to build their future amidst the memories of violence and betrayal, or to leave, to seek a new beginning, a place where they could escape the shadows, a place where they could truly be free. They slipped away from the celebration, unnoticed, and walked to the edge of town, to the very spot where they had first met, the spot where Darius, as an outlaw, had held up the stagecoach and changed Clem's life forever. They stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the vast, starlit sky, the desert stretching out before them, a symbol of both the challenges and the opportunities that lay ahead. "Darius," Clem said, her voice soft, her eyes searching his. "What do we do now? Do we stay? Or do we go?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had endured the storm, a love that had conquered the darkness. He knew the answer, the choice that lay in his heart, the decision that would define their future. "We go, Clementine," he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "We leave Redemption Creek behind. We find a new place, a new home, a place where we can be free. Free from the past, free from the shadows, free to build a life together, a life filled with love, with peace, with hope." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. He kissed her a long, tender kiss that sealed their decision, a kiss that spoke of a new beginning, a new journey, a new horizon. The final confrontation had not been with guns or violence, but with the ghosts of the past, with the weight of unspoken words, with the choice between staying and leaving. And they had chosen to leave, to seek a new beginning, to embrace a future free from the shadows, a future built on love, on trust, on the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of challenges. They would leave Redemption Creek behind, but they would carry its lessons, its memories, and its love with them, forging a new path, a new destiny, under a sky filled with infinite possibilities. Epilogue. The wagon, packed with their meager belongings, rolled slowly away from Redemption Creek, leaving behind the dusty streets, the familiar faces, the memories both bitter and sweet. Clem and Darius, sitting side by side, watched as the town receded into the distance, fading into the vastness of the desert landscape. They didn't speak, their hands clasped tightly together, their hearts filled with a mixture of sadness, relief, and a quiet anticipation of the unknown future that lay ahead. They were leaving behind the only home Clem had known since Thomas's death, the place where she had found both refuge and turmoil, the place where she had met and fallen in love with Darius. They were also leaving behind the shadows of the past, the violence, the betrayal, the constant threat that had hung over them for so long. They were seeking a new beginning, a place where they could build a life together, free from the ghosts of yesterday, free to create a future filled with love, with peace, with hope. They traveled for days, following the winding trails, crossing vast plains, navigating rugged mountains. They camped under the stars, sharing simple meals, their conversations filled with dreams, with plans, with a shared vision of a future yet to be written. They finally settled in a small, quiet valley, nestled amidst rolling hills, a place of breathtaking beauty, a place where the air was clean, the water pure, the sky a vast expanse of blue. They built a small cabin, a cozy haven, a place they could call their own, a place where they could finally put down roots, a place where they could begin to heal, to grow, to thrive. Darius found work as a ranch hand, his skills with horses and cattle proving valuable in their new community. Clem opened a small dressmaking shop in the nearby town, her talent and her reputation quickly spreading, attracting customers from miles around. They made new friends, built new relationships, became a part of a new community, a community that welcomed them with open arms, a community that knew nothing of their past, a community that embraced them for who they were, not for what they had been. Years passed, and their love deepened, their bond strengthened by the shared journey they had taken, the challenges they had overcome, the dreams they had realized. They had children, a son and a daughter, who filled their lives with laughter, with joy, with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. They never forgot Redemption Creek, the town that had shaped them, the town that had tested them, the town that had ultimately brought them together. They occasionally received letters from Sheriff Brody, keeping them informed of the happenings, the changes, the lives of the people they had left behind. But their focus was on the present, on their family, on their new home, on the future they were building together. They had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in embracing the present, in creating a life filled with love, with purpose, with a quiet, enduring happiness. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, their children playing nearby, Clem turned to Darius, her eyes filled with a love that had endured the test of time, a love that had conquered the darkness, a love that had found its true home. "We did it, Darius," she said, her voice soft, her smile radiant. "We found our peace. We found our happiness." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, his gaze meeting hers, his heart overflowing with a love that knew no bounds. "We did, Clementine," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We did." And as the stars emerged in the vast, inky sky, they sat there, together, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to find redemption, to create a future filled with beauty, with peace, with a love that would last forever. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but they had found their way, together, to a place where their hearts could finally rest, a place where their love could truly flourish, a place they could call home. The end.